Well, great. Well, good afternoon again, everyone. Demetrius Burnett, an alum of 2016 MDiv, and also part of the First Changemaker Fellowship cohort, which I know is no longer, but it was a good stretch from 2013 to I believe around 2016 or 17, and that's when I got my certificate in theological studies. So it's good to be with you all. To get started, we'll just start off with introductions. If you can just say your name again. Of course, we can see what year you graduated, but if you don't have it listed, if you can name that in your degree, but also what are you doing now? And why we say that would mean just your organization and your role, not necessarily an explanation, but similar as I just did. I'm a senior program officer at the San Francisco Foundation and an associate minister at Allen Temple. And the next person. So I hope I just modeled what I'm inviting you to do. So again, if you can say your name, you graduated, and degree and your role. Whoever wants to kick us off.
I'll start. I'm Leanne Younger, 2023 MTS graduate, first year DMin student at PSR, currently pastoring a church I helped to start in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm the lead pastor.
Thanks, Leanne, and you can pick who's next.
Mo.
Sister Younger. Mo King, 2.5 weeks ago, MAST and CSSC. I am back home in Portland, Oregon, discerning what the call is to do next, but active participant on the board of literary arts in Portland, Oregon, focusing on their community work. And that's it. And I will send it over to my fellow koinonia person, Janice Taylor.
Hey Mo, hi everyone. I'm Janice Taylor. I graduated last spring, May 23, with through the stackable curriculum. So I have a master's in social transformation and the MDiv. Certificate in spiritual formation. I'm not currently serving anywhere, actually. I am maintaining my job and I'm in the mode of creating. So that's why this space is very precious. And Beth, did you go yet?
I'm Beth Preston. Oakland. Hi, Janice. We seem to be in the same groups. I am a part-time clinical psychologist, retirement age. Someone said that you lose energy after the age of 50. Try how much energy you lose after the age of 65. I'm a mother of young adults, very involved in an Alameda United Methodist Church that's going through some real changes. It always had a very strong social justice program, which is, to be honest, what kept me connected after my kids grew up, and my kids have chosen so far to not be involved in a church. And I'm a little concerned in moving forward, and I'm chair of the Church and Society Committee there. We're undergoing a new pastor this summer, and so it's going through some major changes. But anyway, it's good to be here.
And then Michelle, we'll invite you to introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Jacob.
Hi, I'm Michelle Stellato, non-grad, but it looks very appeasing, actually, since hearing all of your experience with PSR. I'm currently the PSR Director of Development.
Great. And hi, everyone. I'm Jacob again. If you didn't see me before, I'll be co-facilitating this session with Demetrius. I graduated in 2021 with my master's in theological studies at a church that I attend in Concord, First Christian Church in Concord. I'm one of the elders there and soon to be the vice moderator, which sounds very intimidating. And up until really yesterday, I was also the youth education coordinator, and we can talk about that as well. But what I mostly do is I started a business shortly after graduating that was mostly a side hustle, if you will, but became my full-time employment early last year, where I do consulting, mostly in the areas of branding, advertising, and marketing. But I work with different types of companies and organizations, including churches. And I focus mostly on strategic consulting for mission, purpose, and brand fit. So great to be with you all. I'm looking forward to sharing some alternate pathways to ministry.
Thanks, Jacob. So while we're with you, let's just stay with you a bit. Basically, folks, so you know, our thinking is essentially we'd answer one or two questions ourselves and give some more color to our journeys and open up for any questions that you may have. And then we only got 30 minutes. So by the time we finish just conversing on those couple of things, we'll probably be done. But that said, Jacob, I want to invite you to give us some more color on your journey, on your path, right? As you think about the question, how did a PSR education influence your work and your ministry, and in particular, your ministry in the congregational context, but beyond the walls of the church?
Yeah, I grew up in a very conservative, evangelical, fundamentalist Pentecostal Assemblies of God church, right? And so my background looks very different than what the graduate program looked like for me. I escaped that life, thanks be to God, right after or shortly into my early 20s, but really drifted away from faith. And my pathway back into that, and I served during that time as like a youth pastor. I had aspirations of planning churches in this denomination, was a worship leader. And so there were different things that were not going to happen anymore. And I left the faith for the majority of my 20s. And actually, my faith back, or my journey back to faith, came through a class I took on my undergraduate. I went to San Francisco State in my late 20s, and I minored in Arab and Muslim ethnicities and diasporas, which was led by Professor Rabab Abdul-Hadi at San Francisco State, and a class that I took on Palestinian ethnic studies and ethnic studies perspectives totally blew my mind, right? It was complete 180 of everything I had been grown up to believe about everything in the Promised Land. And that one course that I took on accident sort of took me down this path in this new minor. And so when I finished that, I was learning all these things about Islam and all these different perspectives and voices from Islam, including queer voices. And it really led me to the realization that if Islam is not this monolithic religion that I had kind of grown up to think it was, and the same was probably true for Christianity. And so that kind of created a journey back to that. And so I started to entertain what seminary might look like. I didn't ever really think about pastoring, but I was curious about that. And so I Googled progressive seminaries in the Bay Area just one random weekend, and PSR was the first one that came up. I applied, was accepted, and the rest is history. But kind of during the same time as that, my career kind of took its own trajectory, where I was in marketing for this restaurant chain, locally owned out of Sonoma County, and progressively took on more and more responsibility within that company as I was going along PSR's path. And so that is kind of how I ended up in PSR. And I was connected through one of the former staff members. She's the pastor of the church at First Christian Church in Concord. She reached out to me if I would be interested in teaching the youth on Sundays. Since her and I had met at PSR, I said yes. And that was kind of my alternate path, literally, to a ministry role. But really right now, I view myself as a solid, trained number two, not to make too much of a hierarchical point, but I think in this world where the external and internal pressures on our pastors are rising greater and greater, and the need for more skill sets other than what we might traditionally think of pastoring are needed. Some good number ones need some solid number twos, and that's the role that I am happy to fill at First Christian. Demetrius, how about you?
Yeah, I like the way you took that as far as the literal path to PSR. Let's start there. So for me, once I got to PSR, it was very much unlike what I'd grown up with as well. I have moved through a number of states, originally from Chicago, went to high school in Phoenix. And I'd say growing up in Chicago, I understood it's not a denominational at the time as a kid, but realized later that it was an apostolic church. So very high emphasis in, spirit, spiritual warfare, fivefold ministry of apostles, prophets, preachers, teachers, evangelists, all of those types of things that may or may not be familiar to the group. And then moving more to your mainline non-denominationalism in Phoenix, both churches being uh, led by their founders, the co-pastors. I heard mentioned in the last group where the husband and wife couple have started. And when I went to undergrad at Brown in Providence, Rhode Island, so again, up and away on my geographic map is where I got really involved in athletes in action, which is essentially kind of like a fellowship of Christian athletes for how to live this Christian life on campus as a Division I athlete across sports and also across denominations, both Catholic and Protestant and everyone curious, all of the in between as a part of our group. And I got to going into my senior years when I would say I received my call more or less into pastoral ministry. Because as a kid, I'd grown up really involved in youth ministry. I did my first sermon at a very young age. And by the time I said I believe I've been called, my family or people who knew me were like, duh. like you're just kind of getting here. So I interned with the chaplain's office my senior spring after my football career was done, and I actually had time to work. And it's actually through that connection that summer, I graduated in May of 13. That summer, I got an email from an assistant chaplain about this Changemaker Fellowship. And something I may be interested in as I was first beginning to think about divinity school, not even understand the difference between that and seminary at the time. And next thing I knew, within a month, I'd applied on the date of deadline, gotten in room and board and financial aid for the room and board on the tuition program within a month. And it was like, I'm moving to California. So I landed at PSR at the young age of 21. I turned 22 on the campus when I got there, and I had a whirlwind of experience. So I guess I would say I'll pause there as far as that's my literal path to PSR, and I think the next piece will bridge. So as I'll spin it back to you, Jacob. So for you, I'm curious then, you gave us your path to PSR and to ministry, but how has PSR's education itself influenced what you're doing now?
Well, I've always wrestled with, okay, I got a theology degree, so what am I doing with that? So really what I had to cultivate as I tried to answer that question, and I continue to answer that question, is really to think about how the critical thinking and the problem solving that PSR's education presented me, how I can utilize that across disciplines. So primarily, I make my living outside of ministry, right? And I oftentimes say, what I do is kind of ministry adjacent, right? And I don't fulfill a vocational role, but the technical skill sets that I learned at PSR help me solve complex problems and challenges for my clients today. And even outside of kind of that technical tool chest, that social justice lens from which PSR's education is centered and from where it comes from, there are so many conversations outside of the church that folks want to have about what's going on and these issues, and how do we think about these things from a spiritually grounded and social justice rooted lens. And so I can't begin to tell you, the conversations that I've had that I may not have had in a church setting, but these are folks that are curious, they're seeking, they're searching, and they know of my education. We get into conversations and I'm able to apply what I've learned in really what might be called ministry, but it's not really a ministry formally, right? It's not a formal ministry setting. And so that to me, like in the day-to-day, is how PSR's education has helped me come to where I'm at. And I just think that the frameworks and the teachings and the kind of the rootedness in being unafraid to have bold positions, even if you're not titled with reverend in front of your name, I think is so critical as leaders in our communities and in our social circles or business communities, whatever, to still be those voices that are unafraid, even in places that you may not be asked immediately to share share your opinion. What about you, Demetrius?
Thanks for that part of your journey. I guess the answer is it kind of picks up where I left off. So when I got to PSR, I learned quickly that I had a concept of community service, but not of social justice. All the things I've been through, there was charity, there was service, but not justice. And in fact, my first 2 weeks, I remember saying, like, I've heard social justice here more times than I've heard Jesus. Like, what's happening here? And also, it's important to know in that beginning of my second year, yes, the fall of August 8th of 2014 is when Michael Brown was murdered. And that Thanksgiving break was the failed indictment. So for me, again, by that point at 23, it begged the question after a year of kind of immersion into this progressive Christian world that I hadn't had experienced before, kind of priming me, so to speak, that by the time that happened, I remember getting the news. The question for me was, what does it mean for me to be both man and minister in this time? In particular, a Black man, young Black man, and minister during this time, during the very beginning, genesis of the first wave of the Black Lives Matter movement. So for me, PSR on one end was as far left as you could be, progressively, politically, and still somehow call yourself religious. And at the same time, I was planted as a youth pastor in Richmond in Bethlehem Missionary Baptist Church, which was, again, also my first time being so deeply rooted as a member of the Black church and seeing that the Black church has never had the privilege of only being worried about our spirits, as some of my own other previous churches had been. So I was in this full course immersion on the kind of like the more right, justice-ended, social justice-oriented traditional route. Not right, yeah, more traditional, I should say, social justice route, and then PSR, getting a formal theological education that was really shaping me and molding me. So to the point that by the time that I came out of graduation in 2016, I knew whatever the path was next needed to be an intersection of social justice point of view, systems change, and also my other experiences. Like I just got a real estate license just before coming to California. My mother's been a broker most of my life. So I was thinking, where is this intersection of parish ministry, housing, things like that? Something needs to happen where this has a systems level change and role that I do. So the first thing I did when I graduated is I stayed on as youth pastor, but moved from more of an intern basis to a basically half-time staff. And the other half of my staff, my role was actually a half-time role at East Bay Housing Organizations, where I was the interfaith program coordinator working with faith communities on housing policy, on building capacity and for those that were interested in developing on their land. And what was actually most needed, my favorite, the kind of marquee event, was the annual Interfaith Breakfast, where I had to use our skills in liturgy to put together a program and understand how liturgy and works of the people come together to inspire hope, but also bring knowledge and information to mobilize people. I also, because of getting trained as a faith-rooted organizer, which is the difference between faith-rooted and faith-based. Faith-rooted organizing means you take the principles of the sacred texts of whatever the tradition is, and that informs your strategy. So thinking theologically was actually required for my secular job, as well as what I was doing in the church. And after a couple of years, both those came together. I transitioned from both, going to the San Francisco Foundation, where I'm focusing on housing, anti-displacement, systems change, root causes, but also working with the faith community around housing and anti-displacement is also still a part of the work. So that's what all led me here. And I think at this point, we got about 10 minutes left. So transition. So I see a hand. It's a great transition to questions. So appreciate y'all listening to this kind of public conversation. But I'll take it to Beth, a question from you and then from anyone else.
Demetrius, where are you located now? Where do you primarily work?
So the San Francisco Foundation, we're hybrid. So the office is in San Francisco. I'm there once a week or so. And then Allen Temple Baptist Church is where I serve now in Oakland on 85th and International.
Okay, thank you.
I would just say, just to add to a thought, I think the necessity of PSR in this new era, especially when I think about why I give to PSR personally, is because I do have a feeling, I have a suspicion that more and more pathways to ministry, whether it's formal ministry or informal, are going to look more and more like what we've discussed. And it's not going to be so much, from, like, as David was saying earlier, from camp or from kind of the church grown. formalized process. And so I think that PSR is positioning itself to really be a leader in that theological educational space, but also because I think that there's so many organizations, whether it's for-profit, nonprofit, church, whatever, that are really seeking and requiring like interdisciplinary vision and interdisciplinary leadership. And I truly think that even though it's theological, it really does boundary break across, it doesn't stay within one silo of theological education, if that makes sense. Demetrius, what you were saying about theological thinking being required, I think that's a perfect example of how PSR's education in particular spans across different boundaries and different confines. And, you know, I would just share, if anybody is either watching this later or here now in this group and you're kind of wondering, okay, what do I do with this now that I got it? I would say more and more organizations are looking for that type of interdisciplinary leadership. And also, I think it speaks to the new kind of mission statement of that unafraid. I think as you know, the usual suspects when we think about church leaders that are being developed at PSR, I think we have to be comfortable with being unafraid, even in those spaces that may be unfamiliar. So maybe it's not behind the pulpit, or maybe it's not in a chapel, or maybe it's not on stage, but we can still be unafraid in those other spaces that aren't, you know, formally trained in kind of the pathways of ministry as we might think about it. And there, so I just wanted to add that. Demetrius, I don't know if you have a closing thought. I know we have a few minutes left, but
Yeah, I'll give two quick responses for that, and I'm hoping that we have room for one or two more things from the group. That unafraid piece, the work world, especially if you're doing something in the nonprofit sector or government or something that's justice oriented, you need theologically sound people when it comes to root cause analysis and how did we get here. Because one of the complexities of our world is we've been told that religion is not something you talk about in the workplace. Yet when you're doing justice-oriented work, you're trying to address root causes such as slavery and indigenous genocide, and etc. And that's inextricable from the role of religion. But you're not supposed to talk about it at work. So some of the unafraid is recognizing those times where you call out root causes, but you have people who are still practicing, you know, practitioners of the faith, who've been equipped and trained to name the truth of how we've been complicit, and also the new world and the new ways that we need to engage now, if any of our work in any space is actually going to make the world that we're dreaming to be. So I think PSR has been important in training that both in aspect, because even myself, I'm still on a path towards pastoral leadership. I just got ordained in February, but that training has been necessary, not just in the church. All of that is relevant in each space. So I guess that's the last thing. We do actually still have 5 whole minutes, and I want to cherish those. I'm curious, reactions from the group or questions that come to mind for you, or sharing from your own experience.
Could I?
Denise.
So I've served in ministry for a long time as a lay leader and then in justice areas. And one of the things that PSR is now really, I am not going to be doing any of the things I thought I planned to do when I graduated. So I'm really trying to consider how to create sanctuary outside of the traditional church. So in the community, in ways that the community can relate. But I'm kind of curious about, you know, the thoughts around, you know, so I'm a Christian, but I don't feel comfortable preaching the gospel in the ways that I grew up learning it. I do come from a Black liberation church, so I am very comfortable with that idea of theology. But when you start to talk about the interfaith, like not excluding others by the theology that you speak, that's where I am really stuck in my creation process, because I actually don't want to misappropriate other faith traditions. Of course, there's a thought about calling in other people into this, right? But just your thoughts about that and that juxtaposition of creating open boundaries without being inappropriate, and that creativity space of how do we create that kind of sanctuary outside of the church boundaries.
And could you remind me, are you still here in the Bay Area?
I am. I'm in Oakland.
Okay, so one, I'd invite you to get connected to the Interfaith Council of Alameda County, which I was a part of helping start in 2016, and that's been a helpful space. As far as more practically, there's a couple things I named. One thing is what Todd actually modeled earlier. One of the most difficult learnings I had at PSR was how to pray at PSR, right? And maybe it's more Christian now than it was then, I'm not sure, but we had such a wide breadth. So one of the things Todd modeled earlier was the thing that was helpful for me is in times for genuine prayer for yourself, like, Lord, I need to be inclusive but authentic. It's how he lifted up. We pray in the many names or in the name of all that is holy. I pray in the name of Jesus, right? Like there are places where that was freeing for me to have something, right? Because I couldn't feel like I was praying in someone else's faith name. The other thing in the faith through the organizing work I mentioned, I learned is the point is you invite other people, you actually help support them to stand in their own traditions more richly. So it's not that you have to represent the other traditions. You call the folks in who are already in theirs and you support and encourage them to stand even more firmly in it for the justice moment. Now, the tension of that is because you hold the space for all, you don't have fully the same freedom that everyone does. You still have to hold an inclusive space in many ways. But when you invite others in, you don't have to feel like you're speaking for their faiths. And it frees you to stay rich in yours. But at the core of that, I think one question you have to examine is, is this a justice-oriented organization that is faith-rooted, or is this a spiritual community that's justice-oriented? And I think those are slightly different things that can give you some insight on what teaching, speaking, preaching, that kind of thing sounds like.
I think that's a really good answer, Demetrius. Thank you for that. I know we're up on the clock. I don't have another answer to add to that. I think that's such a great question, Janice. And I think about that myself as well when I think about inclusivity in our own church within the four walls and how do we break the boundaries that those four walls sometimes create. And the only phrase that keeps coming back to me is ritual making and being intentional about that ritual making and who we're making it with and what practices we have when we make them and who's invited to that table and how big that table is and what's talked about at that table. But I think as you make those rituals and as you strive towards inclusion in that community and holding authentic space for other voices and perspectives, I think that ritual making becomes the community that I hear in your question that you're seeking. So very good question though. Thank you for that.
Mo, I'll see you off mic. If you just want to put it in the chat, we'll be happy to send you something back.
You got it. Appreciate you.